In a city known for its history and iconic landmarks, Milwaukee isn't often recognized for its comic book culture. Movies and TV shows shape the stories we know today, but where did those stories begin? In this episode, we explore the local artists and collectors who keep Milwaukee's comic scene alive, sharing their passion and breathing new life into tales that continue to inspire generations. Welcome to Cream City Comics on the Break. I'm your host, Nick Calvache. We all love stories, whether they come to life on the big screen, on TV, in books, or through audio. But stories are told in another incredible way, through comic books. The stories in comic books allow our imaginations to run wild. A simple book that tells a story using pictures and words. Comics can be about superheroes, everyday life, fantasy, or any other kind of story, and the combination of art and text that makes the story come to life. Today, we'll explore a comic book colorist, animator, writer.
My name is Jeff Balke. I am now a producer and director. I also do comic books. I'm an award-winning comic book colorist. Doing this full time, and this is my dream. It's what I've wanted to do my entire life. And I had to teach myself. You know, everything is self-taught, because when I started, there wasn't any schooling. So I physically had to just pick up my favorite comic books and just taught. Same thing now with animation. You know, everything with my studio is frame by frame. So everything's going to be drawn by hand, just using today's tools on the computer. Getting to talk to a lot of different artists, that's kind of how I started my company, is that I wanted to have my own voice. I wanted to have my own universe, if you will. And that's why we now have Jeff Balke Studios and Stanley and Friends. Stanley, Natasha, and Chester, my first main three characters. And then everyone else just the other three characters just kind of came around. And now that I've got the characters, I was working with John Carpenter years ago. Him and his wife started their own comic book company. And they wanted to hit the younger market as well, not just adults. So they knew what I was doing, and they remembered that I was a colorist for them. They asked me if I wanted to bring my comics, my ideas, to their company. We all got to work together. You know, it's a very small community here in Milwaukee, in Wisconsin. You know, but in the Midwest, it's kind of big, it's growing. You know, kind of more underground, which is actually kind of cool. There's a lot of people who have great ideas. They don't follow through. They don't finish what they want to do. And I get it, life gets in the way. I get it. But if you're really passionate and you really want to do it, sometimes you have to give up some of your free time. Get off of TikTok for a day. You know, get off of social media in general for a day and physically do what you want to do. Give yourself at least 1 hour a day of working passionately on what you want to do. And that's not just for only Milwaukee or Wisconsin, that's for everybody. The kids section is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because there's more and more people who are writing kids books or doing kids animation or whatnot, comic books. It's growing. Fast but slow. I wish it was a little faster.
We've seen how a comic book artist from Milwaukee made his mark early on, and now he's stepping into what's next for comics. I'm joined in the studio today by Jeff Balke. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm honored.
Of course, it's our pleasure. Tell us about Stanley and Friends. What inspired you to create these wonderful characters?
Many, many years ago, when I was a kid, I was playing in the sandbox, and there were two little squirrels that would always chase and follow each other around, and they would always make their little cheep cheep cheep, that's chirping, whatever they do, and every so often there would even be a chipmunk that would join in, and they would all just be running around up the trees, not the chipmunk, but they would just kind of just run around, and I told myself I'm going to do my characters like those characters because they just look fun, and that was Stanley, Natasha, and Chester, my main three characters. That's how they started.
Where'd you get those names from? Disney went with Chippendale for similar concepts.
Right. I don't know. It just kind of popped. You know, I'm sitting there just trying to come up with these different names, and I'm like, Stanley. I'm like, well, I like Stan Lee, comic book guy.
Sure.
But I'm like, I wanted the whole name to be together. But Stanley just kind of seemed to work. It's a happy name. Natasha, she's my little diva. So I thought that kind of went really well with her.
Sure. And
Chester, because he's all over the place, they just all kind of worked in my head.
Sure. Well, those are wonderful names. What's next in store for them?
Oh, animation. Finally bringing them to life. That's what we're working on, frame by frame. So everything traditionally.
Okay.
We are doing rigging as well. We just started rigging some of the characters, a few of the characters as we speak, actually.
Sure.
And we're going to get them up on TV, phones, wherever.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. What would you say you've done to take action on continuing to tell these stories? So I guess in terms of the animation side of things, what inspired you to bring them to the screen or bring them to life?
When I was, again, going back a little bit, when I was younger, my dad had a projector. He put it on the kitchen table, and he projected my very first cartoon, a Disney cartoon I ever saw called Little Toot. It's a silly symphony, and I fell in love with it. And then right after we watched Planet of the Apes, the original one, of course.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And then he would just show me every so often just different cartoons, and I just really got inspired because it was bigger.
Right.
Back in the early '80s, like this was a big TV,
Right.
12 inches. So when you see it huge on a wall like that, it's like I want to do that. And from that day on, I was teaching myself how to draw, color, write, all that.
Oh, that's a wonderful story. Now, many people think that they understand comic books, changing topics here, but only often at a surface level. From your perspective, what would you say is something fundamental about comics that most audiences overlook? I suppose details could be one of them, but what is something else that you would say is something that's often overlooked?
The number one thing is that not one person does it. It's a whole team of people, anywhere between 5 and 7 people, even more, depending.
Right.
All work on one comic, but everyone thinks like, oh, you didn't do the whole thing. I thought you did the whole thing, with these comics. Like, no. There's like 5 or 6 people on those particular books, and a lot of people just don't realize that until you walk them through it.
Right.
Then they're like, oh, okay, and that's like one of the biggest things in my eyes.
It's a whole team effort. Yeah, you're right that it's often overlooked. I mean, you have the name like at Disney Studios. It's Walt Disney, but we had a whole staff of individuals who was working then within each team, each stage of the whole process. When creating your comic books here, these wonderful illustrations, how many? I mean, I already see 4 names on there already. How many members of your staff would you say were there when you were first starting and bringing these characters to life?
With the books, I have to say there are probably a grand total of maybe 7, but I'm including the editors.
Including the editors.
Yes, which a lot of people forget about them.
Yes.
Even the talent sometimes forgets about the editors.
Right. That is something that's often overlooked. Well, thank you so much for answering those preliminary questions.
Yeah.
Milwaukee is known for history and many stories to be told, and comic book stores are still a big part of that. They remind us why these stories matter and where they all started. Today, we're checking out one of the most popular comic book stores in the city to see, well, what's in store.
Over the years, Milwaukee's comic book community has changed. From small groups of fans trading issues to a network of creators, conventions, and independent shops, all connected by a shared passion for storytelling and imagination. Every comic has a story, and so does the place that brings them to life. Lost World of Wonders has been a Milwaukee landmark for comic book fans for years, offering everything from rare and vintage issues to the latest indie releases. A place where generations of fans and local artists have come together to share their love for comics. Lost World of Wonders has been sharing stories since 1996, so popular that it is known as the largest independent comic book store in southeastern Wisconsin. Fans come to gather a cool variety of comics, from DC to Marvel to Star Wars to anime, to comics still being released today. Having many choices to choose from, the action figures and collectibles brings the comic book community in for wanting more. Lost World of Wonders is more than just a comic book store. It offers a variety of products that cater to many different interests, allowing people of all ages to find something they enjoy.
Lost World of Wonders, continuing to bring joy to people of all ages. This and many other comic book stores are developing new ways to reach fans. So, tell me, Jeff, what are your thoughts on these comic book stores? Would you say that they're moving on to new things, or that they're generic and meeting up to the standards of what people want to see, or what are your thoughts on there?
I think they're trying to move up. I think it's very difficult because a lot of things are digital nowadays. So a lot of
Right.
people, they actually collect digital books. But how do comic stores get to that point? Because they have all the physical copies right there.
Right.
So I know there's a few stores here and there, maybe not in the Milwaukee area, just that I know in general. They tried doing the digital and it just wasn't really panning out too much for them.
Sure.
But I think that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to figure out different ways to bring people in. But I think the comic stores by themselves just speak volumes. Because when you walk in there, it's like, oh, it's just a really cool feeling when you walk into a store.
It's just an experience.
It really is. Yeah, absolutely. That's why I've been collecting since the early mid 80s.
Right, it's part of that whole physical copy movement.
Exactly, yes.
What would you say would be the best way that a comic book store could, incorporate that digital format that you were describing?
If anything, they still have free comic book day, which actually is the first Saturday of every May.
Okay.
Just once a year. I think maybe doing something like that, like maybe just have like a digital download that they can give the free books out that way.
Okay.
And it's only one day a year, I know, bringing people in, but you can actually get a lot more fans in that one day that'll stay with you for the rest of that store's life.
Right. It's almost like, the experience of going into Blockbuster back in the day, and now it's a lot different than,
Right, exactly.
than simply just streaming on Netflix.
Right.
You mentioned earlier about going to comic conventions. During that time period, how would you say that those events, and even going into comic book stores as a kid, how would you say that they impacted you, in terms of creating your art?
Oh, gosh. Going to my first convention, which was Chicago Comic-Con, long time, like 91, I think was the first time.
It's a good one.
It's the first time that I actually met Stan Lee. Waiting in line, I was such a nerd. I mean, I still am, but
you have to be. You have to be. That's the beauty. That's the beauty. It's how you express yourself.
Right, exactly. But just like putting down, like talking a few seconds, with your favorite artist,
Right.
and Stan Lee, who created everything in Marvel, basically, or co-created. Just meeting the people and just kind of hearing their stories, that's a big inspiration. To me, that's a big inspiration.
Oh,
that
yeah,
really
sure.
helped me.
Sure, we all start from somewhere. I mean,
Absolutely.
we didn't just become a Stan Lee overnight.
Right, exactly.
Even he started somewhere.
Yeah.
In the 1950s until today, comic books and comic shops have gone through various periods where interest, dropped and things crashed. I'm presuming, part of that time period could include also the birth of the Silver Age in the 60s, because the Golden Age was, I believe, the 40s or early 50s,
so, yeah.
something like that. And as a comic book artist yourself, do you think that another crash could possibly happen? And what do you think would be the catalyst for such a crash?
I really don't think so. I really don't think that there's going to be any. There's so many different art styles out there now, and what's really kind of drawing,
No pun intended, folks.
Yeah, exactly. But what's really kind of, I think, drawing the comic industry is that there are so many independent companies now. You don't have to just work for Marvel or DC. And I think that's what's really kind of pushing the industry forward. And I don't see any kind of a crash happening anywhere in the near future, at least not in my lifetime anyway.
Right.
Happened one time in the 90s, when Marvel and DC, I think Marvel actually filed Chapter 13.
Really?
That was a big mess, but there were too many books at one time. But see, it's different now.
Could you expand on that, like too many books? Like they were going into too many different areas, or?
They had about maybe 300 books coming out a week. That is a lot of books. And then you have all the different kind of variant covers. You have the shiny covers, you got the holographic covers, you got the foil covers. It went a little bit too a little bit too crazy,
Right.
and because everybody wanted to get them. But unfortunately, I mean, because the prices were going up at that time, I
Right.
think prices going up back then was like $1.50, you know, not the $5 that they are today
Sure.
for cover price.
Well, plus inflation.
And exactly, yeah. But that's, yeah.
Interesting. I didn't realize that. I assumed that Marvel was doing well, especially in the early 2000s when the original Spider-Man films came out.
If you talk to any collector, anybody who's been around in the comic industry in the 90s, and you say 90s comics, you're going to get an eye roll. Probably from anybody, you're going to get an eye roll because it was a really tough time. A lot
Right.
of artists lost jobs, and then the companies, like I said, Marvel filing Chapter 13. It was a tough time.
Sure. I learned something new today. I didn't realize that. Now let's fast forward to a couple years ago. Would you say that COVID-19 changed the value of comics, or have an impact on issues released, or how would you say COVID affected the comic book world?
That's a loaded question. I think to a degree it helped it because you're at home, and this is where the digital side kind of comes in. A lot of the companies are really starting to push their digital comic books, and people could sit home and just download their books, and it was still helping. But what really, I think the biggest thing of 2020 with the pandemic, I think, had to be anime. Anime comics blew up
Right.
at that point. And it kind of left some of the other books kind of, trailing a little bit, but
Just straggling.
yeah, because more kids are downloading anime than the regular books.
Sure.
Nowadays.
Sure. That's definitely something. Yeah, COVID just affected everything.
It did.
For better and for worse.
Yeah.
In many ways. So it's great to see a comic book artist here who has his own studio and is creating his own comics. To get another perspective, we'll now take a look at another comic book artist, one who also creates her own work, to hear her thoughts on comic books here in Milwaukee.
My name is Hannah Hallman, and I am a 30-year-old cartoonist here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I've been drawing comics my entire life. I graduated from the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design, and then after school, I've just been doing self-publishing my comics since. I've been distributing my comics to different independent art festivals, but also in local shops like this here at Lion's Tooth. And so I've been doing web comic zines, and then this past year I self-published my latest graphic novel, and so I'm still working on more books. So my goal is to try and help cultivate a bigger comics community here in Milwaukee and help younger artists set up to be successful. I also am the founder of Milk, the Milwaukee Indie Local Comics Fest, and that's a one-day festival all about cultivating cartoonists from all backgrounds. So it's free for people to attend and artists to vend, and we have everything from high schoolers next to published cartoonists next to each other, all one big day. So yeah. My comics are all gay stories. I am a lesbian who's been with my wife for about 13 years, so queer storytelling is really important to me. And I remember I've been reading comics forever, and obviously I've liked gay comics, but the stories that I wanted didn't really exist. So comics are the perfect way to tell stories. Comics are my favorite. It's the best medium. Milwaukee has a lot of room to grow. I think that we have a lot of interesting shops and spaces, but I think that we have a lot of people that will come to Milwaukee. We've had people from the coast fleeing for just climate reasons, and so I think that Milwaukee's becoming a more and more attractive city to live in and is attracting more talent. Milwaukee has such a great fine art scene and a great design scene, so a great illustration comic scene is just something that's kind of also happening parallel to it. And with all the different local markets and different stores you can sell your work, I think it's only growing, and I am very excited to see where it continues to go. I really want Milk Comic Fest to continue growing. We're a one-day fest right now, but in the future I would love to be a two-day fest in a locked ballroom. Right now we're at the 3rd Street Public Market, which is for the public all day long, which is great. But with that growing, I want to just continue seeing the artists that are here, and I want to see more events people do, but mostly I want to see more people from Chicago be like, hey, Milwaukee's kind of awesome, and I need to dump Chicago and come live here, because we are where it's at.
No, yeah, that's it. Like many storytellers, Hannah Hallman is creating her own path, using her creativity to bring new stories to life. Now, Jeff, as you just saw another comic book artist, do you agree or disagree with her, and if so, if not, why?
I agree. You know, Milwaukee is very attractive in a lot of different ways, not just of the people, but really because a lot of people, it is a lot cheaper to live here, and a lot more people are coming this direction.
Right.
There's a lot of Chicago people, a lot of Chicago artists that are moving here. I've probably could name like 30, you know, over the past couple of years that have moved out here. Because it's got a very nice independent underground kind of scene, and that's exactly kind of where Chicago started, and New York and all those places. They moved up pretty quick.
Right, right. And Milwaukee is still in a place where it's fresh, and you know something I noticed about the city is that it retains that freshness of sorts, even for the underground scene.
It does. I mean, there's so much talent here. I mean, and a lot of it's missed, unfortunately.
Right.
You know, I hate that, but
That's the problem with it being underground.
right. Yeah. Yeah. To a degree.
Yeah.
You know, but there's a lot of different conventions. There's smaller shows, you know, that are kind of trying to start bringing these artists up, you know, because it needs to happen.
Sure. Going off of that, what would you say would be the way for artists to stand out, make themselves shine, and get their artwork out there and recognized? Like, I think that's part of the disconnect that you just described. So what are your thoughts on bringing that out?
The number one thing that everybody always does is like social media. Yes, you have to have social media if you're an artist. You have to have
It's
it.
a second job.
Pretty much, yeah. But in my opinion, meeting people face to face, shaking their hand, talking with them, the real Facebook like this, that's what you have to do. You have to reach out to people, because you're not just selling your art, you're selling yourself. And people want to see you. And when they see you talk and they hear you talk, it's the passion that they're buying. So go to smaller conventions. You don't have to go to Chicago. You don't have to go to New York or San Diego. There's a few smaller shows right here in Milwaukee that happen, or at least the surrounding areas too, that you can do. And that's the best thing that they can possibly do, in my opinion.
Now, when you talk about smaller shows, you know, presumably the larger shows have big names, or, you know, yeah, just big names or people who are higher up there, you
Right.
know. So what would be beneficial about going to a smaller convention? Is it to connect with local artists on a similar level, or what are your thoughts on that?
You're connecting to everybody. You're connecting with other artists who are, of course, in your area, but then you're also able to talk to people. It's not, when the fans come to conventions and you have those big, huge fans, you got the celebrities and you've got the big
Right.
guys in the comic industry, those are the first people the fans are going to go to. And if you're lucky enough, the fans will come in, they'll find you in Artist Alley.
Right.
You know, maybe, but it's also gargantuan. Those shows are huge. These one-day shows, they're nowhere near as big. You're easy to find, and you can stand out a heck of a lot more.
Sure. You mentioned Artist Alley. Is that a code word or slang?
No, Artist Alley is just kind of like its own little thing. Like it's like a show within a show.
Sure.
So all the artists just kind of go in like one little area within the conventions, the
Sure.
big conventions, and that's all it is. Literally, sometimes it's just one row,
Okay.
but sometimes it's just like a whole big block party, basically, of Artist Alley, just of artists just all next to each other, set up.
Sure. So I can't find it on Google Maps.
No. Maybe the San Diego one you can, but maybe not here.
Sure. Now, beyond Hannah and yourself, are there people that are taking a different route in the comic book industry, specifically to make an impact here in Milwaukee?
Taking a different in meaning.
Just a different approach. You know, you mentioned that the Chicago, New York, LA, all these other larger cities, artists, they have their own approach and they seem to follow a formula. Would you say that there's a difference here in how artists go about in Milwaukee?
I can't speak for everybody, but I think everyone kind of stays like doing the same formula,
Sure.
if you will. Because that's the best way to kind of get it out there. You know, social media, like I said, social media, meeting people, you know, face to face. We all kind of do the same thing. It's really hard to stand out in other ways. I mean, I don't know what other way there could possibly be, unless you want to like dance naked on the corner and say, "Hey, buy my book," you know, or something like that. Bless your heart,
That's
if
a
you
good
do.
media stunt.
Right.
Well, on that note, Milwaukee has a growing and passionate comic book community that blends creativity obviously, history, and local culture. From independent shops to community events, the city has people who not only just enjoy reading comics, but they love creating them and sharing the passion in their stories. Local artists, writers, and fans help keep the scene alive, making Milwaukee more than just a place to buy comics. It's a way to build connections, inspiration, and storytelling. The community shows that comics aren't just, they're not just entertainment. They're a way for people to explore ideas, celebrate imagination, and more importantly, bring people together. Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This was great.
Of course, it was our pleasure. This has been Cream City Comics on the Break. I'm your host, Nick Calvache. Thank you so much for joining us.